Hi, and welcome to chapter 31. So we're almost done with our journey. And what we're going to do in this chapter is we're going to open the economy back up to get a more accurate description of what our economy is actually like. So let's go ahead and jump right into the slides. Okay, so lots of learning objectives that we're going to look at here. Excuse me. Some of them we will accomplish here in this objective. Okay, so remember back in chapter, I believe, 25, we closed the economy. So what that meant was we had said, according to the national incomes accounts, GDP is equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditures plus net exports. In chapter 25, we closed down the economy. So essentially what we did was we forgot about net exports. Okay, so we kind of isolated that and we just were left with the identity on the left-hand side here. In this chapter, we're going to open the economy back up. Okay, so now I want you to remember that GDP is equal to consumption plus investment plus government purchases plus net exports. And we're going to spend a lot of this chapter talking about this net export side. Remember, net exports is equal to what we export or sell to other countries, subtracting what we import from other countries. So we do interact with other economies throughout the world. Again, we buy and sell services, goods and services, and I have some breakdowns of that for the United States. And we buy and sell stocks and bonds. Okay? So I absolutely love this hyperlink. You can click on it here to get live interactive charts. But this shows the trade patterns, really, of what we look at in terms of our export and our import. So this is the U.S. in comparison to the rest of the world. Okay, so not so worried about this one, but I love that it does exports per capita. I love that it does product exports, it does imports, it does service exports, service imports. So it's a really nice way to just kind of capture all of the information. We're going to drill down on that a little bit deeper at this point. So what exactly does the U.S. export? So the different colors are different industry codes. The higher the percentage, we were number 3 in 2018 in the world. We exported $1.44 trillion worth of goods and services. And so again, this is where the 1.44. What's really nice, if you go into the actual website, you can click on these smaller categories and know exactly what they are and what percentages they make up of that particular industry. So as you can see, refined petroleum, because it's the biggest one up here, that is our number 1 product export that we have. And followed by crude petroleum, planes, helicopter, spacecraft, those kind of things. So I guess one of the reasons I like to show this to you is because it really helps to understand why the administration focuses on things that they focus on. Okay, so for example, oil, right? Natural gas and so on. So, integrated circuits, over here, medical instruments. I mean, kind of interesting when you look at what we sell. And again, an export is what we sell to other countries. So this is a gain for us in GDP. Where do they go? So I like this one too, because why do you hear about the certain countries that you hear about all the time? We hear a lot about China and the trade war with China. We hear somewhat about Japan, and we just passed a new translation from NAFTA, which was Mexico and Canada. And Mexico and Canada are our 2 largest trade partners because of proximity. More so, we just passed a new, not that long ago, trade agreement with Mexico and Canada, and kind of changing some of the things that we had with NAFTA. So again, why do you hear about the countries you hear about? This is usually why. Okay, so what does the U.S. import? Remember, imports are a negative to GDP. okay? Because these are things that we're buying from other countries. So when we talk about what we buy from other countries, in 2018, that same year, it was 2.41 trillion. So notice that we import more than we export, which means we have a trade deficit. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Again, I like the graphic because it says, okay, well, what is it that we export? Obviously, cars. Cars are our number one import, we buy. Notice crude petroleum shows itself again over here. And again, some of digital broadcasting, computers, so on. Again, I really love this. It's called the Office of Economic Complexity. It was free for right now. And so I wanted to grab these graphs and show them to you. Where do U.S. imports come from? Again, higher the percentage. And notice the number one place is China. And so that's why, particularly with COVID and some of those kinds of things, you did see that that was problematic because a lot of our imports come from China. Okay, exports again are sold to other countries. Imports are purchased from other countries. So our net exports, again, as we talked about before, are just going to be whatever we sell minus whatever we buy. Now, for our purposes of discussion in this particular objective, and really for this chapter, it's not realistic, but what I want you to think about is imagine that everything that is sold to these other countries like China, Japan, Mexico, Canada, have a price tag on them in US dollars. Everything we purchase from another country is in their currency. So kind of jumping back in the slideshow for just a moment. So if it's sold, it's got, I don't know, I can't draw a boat very well, but there's a boat. Sure, you're right. Okay, and it's got a lot of containers on it. If you've ever been to a port, you've seen these leave the port. And those are all priced in US dollars, and they're going to another country. Anything we purchase from another country, again, I'll just draw another little boat, is in that country's currency. So I'll put yen here. And that'll become important when we talk about some new concepts that we have not talked about previously. Okay, so a trade surplus, some countries have this. China, for example, this is where they sell more than they buy. Okay, so that means that their net exports are positive. Okay, we, however, in the US, buy, as you could see with the graphics I showed you, more than we sell. Oops, accidentally, there we go. So a balanced trade is where we neither buy more than we sell or sell more than we buy. So we right now in the United States have a trade deficit, and the current administration is working to change that a bit. Some of the things that influence what we sell, what we buy. The tastes, we like domestic goods made in the USA, but we also like foreign goods because many times they can produce them more cheaply. So semiconductors, those kinds of things can be produced more cheaply in other countries. Prices becomes important. Prices of goods, both home and abroad. And the reason for those prices has to do with exchange rates. Now, you might think that a strong dollar is good. It is. So a strong dollar, meaning the dollar's value is going up, which means the money supply is going down. So value of a dollar increases. One of the problems is that hurts us in terms of our exports because then things priced in US dollars become more expensive to foreigners, okay? And so when we talk about a strong dollar versus a weak dollar, if we had a weak dollar, that would be a decrease in value, and the money supply would be increasing, that would help our exports. Again, some of the factors that would influence a country's, the incomes, how much are we earning? versus what is the rest of the world earning. Transportation or logistics is another one. How expensive is it to get the product out of the country? When I was in Europe, oh my gosh, decades and decades ago, you could get a Mercedes for about $3,000, a brand new Mercedes, 3,000 US dollars. The problem is you had to pay all of the costs to get it to the US. And by the time you got it to the US, now you're looking at about $60,000. Okay. The last one is government policies toward international trade. Every government looks at trade a little bit differently. So we talked about Japan, where a foreign entity cannot hold more than 49% of a corporation, but sometimes there'll be warring factions, so wars. So this is why we worry about who's in power, and is that administration lasting? Okay, so right now, today, and well, not today, but in the news right now is Brazil. Notice they were one of the bigger partners that we saw over there. And Bolsonaro is not, now has COVID, and a lot of people are upset with him in Brazil. So we're always looking about whether that administration will change. And if it will, who will it change to? Will they have a different perspective on trade? Okay, so over time, this is what I want to put here. Over time, not currently, because currently this is actually wrong. The U.S. has increased international trade. Okay, again, our largest trading partners you saw on the graphics. And there is an increase in international trade, both U.S. and the world. So again, transportation becomes more cheap. Telecommunications, if you're working from home, as I'm currently doing, that facilitates communication. Which helps to make things easier to transport. Again, technological progress. And the last one are trade policies. Now, NAFTA is no longer a trade policy. We replaced it with the America something Act. I can't remember off the top of my head. But we still have the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. That's what GATT stands for, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. We also have the World Trade Organization, the WTO. So again, kind of who monitors this type of thing. So here is the difference between our exports and our imports. Remember, looking at that previous graph, we're about $1 trillion deficit in our trade balance. So we have a trade deficit because we import or buy more from other countries than we sell to other countries. Okay, at this time, I want to introduce a new concept. And what you want to remember is it's all based upon net exports. Net exports are the physical, okay, are the physical goods. Now, our new term is called net capital outflow, or NCO, net capital outflow. This is the monetary value of those goods or services. Okay, now what you want to remember, and this is the most important part of this, is that if net exports are the physical side, net capital outflow is the monetary side. So if we import or export, remember that I said if we export something, that is the X of net exports, and those things are priced in dollars. If we import something, that is the N, right, of net exports, and that's priced in foreign currency. Now, net capital outflow, so if NX equals imports, exports minus imports, then net capital outflow is just the monetary side of it. So net exports, this is the important part, net exports have to always equal net capital outflow. Always, always, always. So what are some types of net capital outflow? First of all, the purchase of foreign assets by domestic residents. So this is a person in the US that buys stock in Sony. Sony's a Japanese company, and that would be foreign portfolio investment. Foreign direct investment would be, for example, if Sony establishes a business, a physical presence in that economy. So let's see, Sony headquarters in New York. Okay, so the purchase of domestic assets by foreigners, okay? Variables that can influence this net capital outflow. And remember, that always has to equal net exports. So they're very similar, but notice we're going to say the real interest rate, because if you can get, here's the US, and I'll just use China. So if you can get a 3% interest rate in the US, but in China, accounting for all of the exchange rates and everything, you can get 5%, where would you save? Obviously, you'd save in China. Real interest rate paid on domestic assets. So that's just the flip of it and looking at the US. What are the economic and political risks? That's where I talked about administration changes. Is this a place that's susceptible to wars? Okay, and again, government policies. That would be our example of Japan and a foreign entity not being able to own more than 49% of any corporation. Okay, so net exports, again, is the difference between what we sell minus what we buy. Net capital outflow says, well, what's the amount of foreign assets by domestic residents? So this is a US citizen buys Sony stock. And what's the amount of domestic asset bought by foreigners? What if Mr. Let's see, I'm going to use one of my former doctoral professor, Dr. Shen, okay, who is from China, in China, buys an American company, Coca-Cola. So that's the portfolio side of it. It could also be that the US does foreign direct investment. This is portfolio investment. And over here, direct investment would be if, okay, Kentucky Fried Chicken builds in Japan, which they have. So that's direct investment. Again, a US company in a foreign entity, okay? Or it could be that we have IKEA, which is a Swedish, yes, I think so, manufacturer, has stores in Lansing. That would be direct, okay? Remember, very important, net capital outflow always equals net exports. Okay, so when net exports are positive, that means we have a trade surplus. What does that mean? We're selling more goods to foreigners, right? From the net sale of goods and services, they receive foreign currency, they buy foreign assets, so capital is flowing out of the country. So when net exports are positive, dollars are flowing out of the US. When net exports are negative, which we're going to look at here in just a moment, then dollars are staying domestically. They're staying in the US. So dollars are flowing to the world if that's positive. And we may see that foreign currencies, and that's exactly what we have, yen, let's see, the euro, and the British pound sterling. Okay, so when there's a trade deficit, which is what the US currently has, again, our imports are greater than our exports. So our net exports are negative, okay? So this is the important part here. The net purchase of goods and services needs to be financed. Selling assets abroad, capital is flowing into the country. So just what I said is we have we have yen, we have euros, we have pounds, you know, so on and so forth, flowing into the US from the world. Okay, so let's take a look at the current net exports. I think if I click on this hyperlink, it's not going to do it because I'm in the share, but if you click on the hyperlink, you're going to see the two graphs of net exports. Okay, let's play around with this for just a moment. Variables that affect net exports. What do you think would happen to US net exports if Canada experiences a recession? So they have less income, right? And increased unemployment, which means they have less Canadian dollars. Okay, so let's think about that for just a moment. If they experience a recession, now think about it in terms of we're asking net exports. So exports, things that the US sells, minus things that we buy. Okay. Okay. So are we going to be able to export as much to them? And the answer is no. So what would happen is exports would decrease from the US. And as a result, net exports would grow more negative for us. Increase in a negative fashion. I should put decrease here because it becomes more negative. It increases our trade deficit. Okay, let's look at our next one. U.S. consumers decide to be more patriotic and buy more products made in the USA. Actually, really, that means assembled in the USA. So what would happen here? Again, same kind of result. Exports, I'm sorry, no, that's wrong. I have to read the slide and write and do the other stuff. So what would happen? We would decrease our reliance on foreign goods. And so what would happen is imports would fall. And net exports would rise. Prices of goods produced in Mexico increase faster than prices of goods produced in the US. Okay, so think about now, place yourself in Mexico. And you're sitting there and you have two prices. You have the Mexican price and you have the US price. So two products, exactly the same, maybe baby formula, I don't know. The Mexican one costs 50 pesos. And the US costs 40 pesos. Again, exchange rates, all of those things held constant. Which one are you going to buy? If you're in Mexico, you're going to buy the cheaper one. So basically what would happen is our exports would increase And so therefore our net exports would increase. Okay, so US net exports would fall on the first one. US net exports would rise. And the last one, US net exports would increase. I think we got those right. Okay, that's the end of this first learning objective. Very important to remember that net capital outflow is the monetary side of trade. Net exports is the physical side of trade. Net exports must equal net capital outflow. I'll see you back in objective 2. Thanks. Hi, and welcome to Chapter 31, Learning Objective 2. In this particular learning objective, what we're going to do is to look at the relationship between savings, investment, and international flows. So let's go ahead and I'll share my slides and get right to it. At the end of this, we do have a short video. I thought rather than read a whole bunch of PowerPoints to you, it would be so much easier to watch a video. So we're going to do that. Okay, so let me share my slides. Okay, so our learning objective is we're going to take a look at how savings, investment, and international flows are related. So remember, in an open economy, we have the national savings accounts of GDP is equal to consumption plus investment plus government purchases and net exports. Also remember, we rearranged this equation. So I'm just going to do that over here so you can kind of refresh your memory. Plus investment plus government purchases plus net exports. And what we had done previously is we subtracted consumption, subtracted no, that's wrong. We don't subtract investment. Okay, and we subtracted government purchases. And we said that national savings, which is GDP minus consumption minus government expenditures, is equal to investment. Now notice that because we've opened this economy back up, we have this NX, so plus net exports, okay? So you can kind of look at it there. So remember that this was equal to national savings, which we called S. And we looked at it from the tax implications, but now we're going to look at it from an open economy perspective. So that is national savings is equal to investment, and that domestic, that might be investment both domestic and abroad, plus net exports. Now, net exports is more of a good, and what we want to do is to change this variable right here so that we end up with national savings is equal to investment plus net capital outflow, okay? Because that's like the dollars or the foreign currency, depending on which one it is. So basically, we have a new idea that national savings or savings is equal to the domestic investment, which is I, plus the net capital outflow, which is what you see here. Okay, if there's a trade surplus, again, remember that we're selling more than what we're buying, which is not what we have in the United States. Then our net exports will be positive, which means likewise that our net capital outflow would have to be positive. Now, what does that mean in terms of GDP? It would mean that GDP is greater than domestic spending. It would also mean that national savings is greater than investment. Okay, so remember the S is national savings. Which is equal to GDP minus consumption minus government expenditures. In the United States, we buy more than we sell to other countries. So net exports will be negative because we're buying more than we're selling. What this means is that domestic spending is greater than GDP. It also means that investment is greater than national savings. So savings, investment is greater than savings. Okay, which also means that net capital outflow is negative. Now, we call net capital outflow, even if it's a positive thing, like you saw up here in trade surplus, this would be that dollars would be leaving. And even though it is positive, we still call it net capital outflow. Here, dollars are staying in the US, and we still call it net capital outflow, okay, even though dollars are staying home domestically. If we have balance, net capital outflow would equal 0 because net exports is equal to 0. So I like this chart. This is table 1 in your book and kind of shows the different types of flows that we could have. So this is the US. We have a trade deficit. Balanced trade. Some countries have that. Trade surplus would be China. Okay. Again, I could paraphrase, isn't the national debt a problem? But I'm choosing not to. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a video. And it's not too long. But the name of the video is the trade deficit a problem? So that kind of fits nicely with what we're studying. And that's really the end of this learning.
The United States trade deficit with all of its trading partners was $500 billion in 2016. That's the equivalent of nearly 3% of the U.S. economy. Is that trade deficit a problem? First, what is a trade deficit? A trade deficit happens when a country's imports of goods and services exceed its exports of goods and services. In other words, when a country buys more from the rest of the world than it sells, the country incurs a trade deficit. What are the economic costs to the United States of the trade deficit? Because the United States persistently spends more than it earns, and because the dollar has been historically strong, the United States must either borrow from foreign lenders or attract investment from abroad. So the longer trade deficits persist, the greater the extent of foreign financial claims on the United States. Those claims take the form of loans that must be either refinanced or repaid, or in the form of U.S.-based assets purchased by foreigners with the U.S. dollars they earn. And those assets can include whole firms, buildings, land, and a few other items as well. If net foreign claims become a very high fraction of the U.S. gross domestic product, the burden of paying interest and dividends and rents and royalties could drain the U.S. economy. Since U.S. imports are concentrated in manufactured goods, a larger deficit translates into fewer manufacturing jobs. But deficits are only one part of the long-term manufacturing job loss. Labor-saving automation and information technology explain most of the decline in manufacturing jobs in recent decades. Today, manufacturing jobs account for 8.5% of the U.S. labor force. In 1970, they accounted for 26.5% of the labor force. Does the United States trade deficit have any economic benefits? Well, yes. The trade deficit brings in tangible resources from abroad for investment in the U.S. economy. Foreign-owned firms operating in the United States pay above average wages, they invest more in research and development, and they enhance the productivity of U.S. companies with which they compete. Larger imports also enable American consumers to purchase a variety of goods at lower costs, dampening inflationary pressures when the economy approaches full employment, which is where it's approaching today. Finally, by buying more from abroad, the United States stimulates the economies of U.S. trading partners, enabling them to buy more U.S. goods and services. Today, world growth is pretty lethargic and in need of a boost. So, is the trade deficit good or bad? Well, the answer is not one-sided. When an economy is growing rapidly or experiencing high inflation, economists generally believe that the benefits from a trade deficit outweigh its costs. But during a recession, or when a country suffers deflation, a trade deficit can do more harm than good. This was Gary Hufbauer, a senior fellow with the Peterson Institute for International Economics.